like to move over to the next section of today's online event. Dave Schwab has done me a huge favor and helped out by assembling a panel of really interesting people playing in the big data space. Dave is a seasoned and respected entrepreneur of his own right and a member of Sierra Ventures, and he's going to talk about turning bits into dollars, yen, or euros with 4 people who've done or are doing that today. Dave?
Thanks, Alistair. Thanks for the kind introduction there. I was asked to make a few comments from a VC's perspective, but the more interesting part of this conversation will be with a very esteemed panel that we have, which I'll introduce in just a moment. So first, a few introductory comments. I get asked this often, what do VCs look for? And although this may seem straightforward, many of the things I'm about to talk about don't all come together in one opportunity. Often when they do, we typically invest. So the first point here is a true pain at the CIO level. And what we mean by that is it's really the number one budget item on a CIO's budget list. Now, we're fortunate at Sierra over the last 6 or 7 years, we've built a Sierra CIO advisory board that's got 67 Fortune 500 CIOs on it, and we are talking to these folks all the time. We do our own surveys. We have monthly calls. We have an annual conference, and I'm not saying that to pat Sierra on the back, but we are in and around these people all the time, and I can tell you that big data and all aspects of it, from the bottom of the stack to the top with analytical apps, would be top of mind and top of budget for CIOs today. And some of the reasons for that are indicated in some of these numbers, which are fascinating if you think about today's world and all of the IT that's been purchased over the last 30 years, and you still have 1 in 3 business leaders saying they're making decisions on information they don't trust. You have 1 in 2 saying they just don't have the information they need to do their jobs. 83% of them saying business intelligence and analytics are core to their competitiveness. And 60% of CEOs saying we just need to do a better job managing information. So at the CEO and the CIO level, even with all the investments that they've made over time, they're still not feeling like they've got the right data at the right time to make critical business decisions, which is fascinating. So this is a true top-of-mind pain point for CIOs. The second thing that we look for at Sierra would be breadth of market. And the interesting thing about big data is that data is data, and every company in every vertical market in every geography on the planet has or will have a big data issue over the next decade. This is an enormously broad market, which is a very, very attractive aspect for us. And then finally, the other thing that's attractive is depth. In fact, oftentimes we think of markets in a 2x2 matrix where the x-axis might be the breadth of the market, and the y-axis might be the depth, the opportunity to really bring domain expertise and real IP into the equation. We're really looking for a kind of a lot of square inches on that 2x2 matrix, and this market that we're in, that we're all calling simply big data, does offer both the breadth and the depth. So it's a top pain point. CIOs are going to spend money on this, and every CIO in most companies across all verticals and all geographies have this problem. And there are opportunities to bring significant domain expertise to the table, which we can somewhat see in this chart, which I guess you could say this is maybe Sierra's view of the world that may not be shared by everyone, but we would see opportunities up and down this big data stack, starting with the actual Hadoop distribution kind of in the middle of the stack. And There are opportunities beneath that in areas like things different, other file systems other than HDFS. And there are opportunities above that in deployment tools and visualization, and then actual analytical apps on top at the top of the stack. It would be our view, and again, maybe not shared by everyone. I think we'll hear some debating on this next point today. That we would think that the top of the stack is the most interesting place to be, the actual analytical apps. And we heard some comments earlier that suggested that the apps is just a feature. I would, and I'm not sure if Alistair wants a controversy on this phone call or not, but we would think a little bit opposite of that. We think that's where the long-term opportunity to build a long-term sustainable company would be better as you move up that stack. So with that as the introductory comments, let me move to the introduction of the panel. Alistair has already introduced me, and what we've asked is each of the panelists to maybe just spend a moment or two introducing themselves, and we'll start with Todd.
Morning, everybody. So my name's Todd Papaioannou, currently at Yahoo. I'm the VP of Cloud Architecture there and serve as the Chief Architect for all of our global cloud technologies, which covers a huge amount of different technologies from data acquisition, data processing, Hadoop, multiple cloud serving containers, and the like. I have a background in big data. I was 5 years at Teradata, driving a number of programs there, and prior to that I was at Greenplum, Metapa, even before it was Greenplum. So data is thing I've been doing for the last 8-9 years, and super excited about the explosion in innovation that's happening in the big data space at the minute.
Thanks, Todd. Anand?
Hey, hi. My name is Anan Jhingran. I'm the CTO for IBM's Information Management Division. So in effect, CTO across all things data, that is about storing, managing, and analyzing data. And I have a second role. I'm also the co-chair across IBM for IBM's cloud computing technology efforts. And therefore, my favorite playground is the intersection of these two. And just as a background, I've been with IBM for a long time, and some have described me as one of the midwives that helped IBM get into the warehousing and analytical space, and therefore I have seen various stages of the technology evolution and can comment on the old and the new and everything else that is exciting now.
Thanks, Anand. Hi, Anderson. Up to you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Anderson. I'm running as the co-founder of Alpine Data Labs. Our focus is to really push all the predictive analytics on where all this big data is stored, and trying to make sure that other than the big data is the king, and allow different vertical industries to build complicated vertical-centric modeling process flow whereby they can operationalize it very easily without data movement and operationalize directly into their kernel that can make the data movement really fast and data like management very fast. And this is where we focus, and we believe making sure all the enterprise can take advantage of their big data investment with result is what our focus is.
Thank you, Anderson. And finally, Luke.
Hi, guys. It's Luke Longergan from EMC's Data Computing Division, where I'm employee number 108,062. And prior to having Greenplum be acquired at EMC, I was the CTO and co-founder of Greenplum. And as we speak, I could say that I know everybody on the panel. It's a great panel. We work together in various ways around big data over the years. And I think it's a really exciting time. There's obviously a great deal going on in the different technologies that people are using to gain insight from data, and lots of really exciting new use cases that we're both cultivating and seeing just spring up organically around the world. So it's an exciting time. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Luke. The format that we decided to implement today, rather than having more slides, we thought we would get into some meaty questions and have the panelists take a crack at them. And the first question that we'd like to ask, I'm going to direct to Luke. And this question really says, hey, and to use, unfortunately, a baseball analogy, but a lot of people are very, very excited about big data. I mean, it obviously has buzz, and you hear people say, oh, we're just in the first inning of what's going to be a very long and exciting market going forward. But Luke, what are some issues you think about that might slow things down? Is this just buzz? Is there something in front of us here that we're not seeing?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think one of the things that happens right now, firstly, the why do big data? I think that question has been answered pretty well. In other words, I think there is a gold rush going on right now. People understand that leveraging the data that is out there to connect better with customers means big revenue. That's happened over and over again, whether it's Groupon or others who leverage data to create new products. I think that why question has been answered. But this question is about how and what stands in our way. I do think one of the big issues, big challenges we've got, and I think Anderson with Alpine has part of the answer, but is data scientists, and the voodoo magic required to get the insight out of the data is very difficult. Requires a deep background in mathematics, and I think that we're very short on that supply of those people who can do that work. So we look for opportunities. The answer to that, in my opinion, is to find ways to bake these deeply analytic products. And if we use Twitter sentiment analysis as an example, where you might pick demographics and then get a read from Twitter data on how they feel right now, that kind of analytic product could be very useful in a variety of applications, but you shouldn't have to have a PhD in math to use it. So if we can find ways to create data products that are very, very rich in content that could be used by people who don't have a PhD in math, I think that goes a long way to addressing the problem.
So you would argue, Luke, that the usability and visualization tools that we see developing in the marketplace, that they actually could be important.
Yeah, I think it's both the tools and the methods. So how people take what they do and make it easier for developers to consume. I mean, ideally, a 15-year-old with the Apple iPhone development kit should be able to drag and drop some things compositionally into an application that yet reflect very deep data analysis products. And I think in order to do that, we have to tool up differently and also use the tools differently.
Hey, Dave, this is Anand. Can I just jump in a bit?
Yes,
I think that there are a couple of other things that I'm seeing the group chat kind of talk about it also, that with all our fascination and excitement, some would say breathless excitement about the value of data, if we are not cognizant about the dangers that society perceives with respect to proliferation and keeping of the data, all the privacy issues and others, then we might run into some backlash associated with it. So we have got to, as a community, be very cognizant about the goodness and the badness that comes with it, and make sure that both sides proceed equally, not just what technology can enable.
That's an excellent point, Anan. That's an excellent point. You could argue the answer to this question, what could stop things from really moving forward? That would be a top 3 answer to the question, probably.
Privacy.
Privacy, yeah. Yeah, because big data, the definition of big data in people's minds now is, if you talk to CIOs, they're saying, okay, well, it's unstructured and structured, and it's internal and external. So the universe of data now is moving into more and more sensitive areas as you move to unstructured and external, where the data problem used to be structured and internal, where maybe privacy was less of an issue. So the vector is kind of in the direction of more sensitive data, which is an interesting response or not.
Now, of course, what we've got to know is that there's a lot of data that doesn't necessarily have the privacy implications. So we know about what happened with location data and others, but there's a huge amount of other data, for example, that the IT systems are spewing out. So what we want to make sure is that our big data capabilities advance on fronts that have both kind of privacy sensitivities as well as not, and I would expect that kind of balance will be found by the community over time.
Well, I'll move to question number 2, which is another quite interesting question. There'd be a few panelists that could weigh in on this. I'm going to direct this question to Anderson. You see a fair amount of activity with large companies, and we see it, and I know IBM sees it as well in their activities, people experimenting with the Hadoop and other things. And this question is the work that's being done and is what's on the customer's minds a fundamental replacement, which is, oh my goodness, I can finally get rid of Teradata, or is it net new applications? Anderson, you want to take a first crack at this?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are facing two difficulties on one is the complexity and one is the cost. And whether it's to do with investing on the data warehouse or replacing it, or versus like this big data movement, is still they need to deal with this complexity and the cost one. From my view, I believe there will be two pieces. One piece is really to take advantage of all the data they already invested on the data warehouse, and how can quickly really show the return of investment. And I agree with Luke's point of view. The new method, the new tooling that actually built inside the data warehouse allow those people to quickly take out the ROI is one part. But the other part is if they have not get into this data warehouse effort, they can just take advantage of this exponential decrease of the storage and cloud and build new vertical analytic applications on top of those appliances. And so from that angle, for people who have not jumped into the data warehouse effort and suffer from those complexity and cost issue, they can just pick the low-hanging fruit. For example, for the banking, they should deal with this stress test or consumer mortgage predictions on the losses. For credit card, any consumer-oriented, they can just build on this web analytic and how you capitalize it on the behavior. So I believe there are two parts, but the cost and complexity issue are still the two major barriers. They need the new tools and new methodologies to tackle.
Thanks, Anderson. And it might be interesting to hear from you, as we've discussed things in the past, and not to report any confidential numbers, but IBM has got a significant number of customers that are, quote unquote, experimenting with Hadoop, and I think those experiments in some cases are significant, and now that's evolved into the Big Insights release that happened a few weeks ago. What are the IBM customers doing, Anand?
So it's public knowledge that we are working with order of about 100 customers in different degrees of progress. The point here is that most of our clients are beginning to go from a process-driven business to an analytics-driven business. And many of us on this kind of get it, why is it taking them so long? Isn't it obvious that the next wave is analytics-driven business? But if for those of you who understand large enterprise know that such transitions don't easily happen at the snap of a finger. So as these people are making the transition from a process-driven business to an analytics-driven business, the scope of the problems that they know they are not answering today, or the scope of the questions that they don't even know that they should ask, they're beginning to stare at it. And what they're realizing is that warehouses that we have supplied, warehouses that Teradata have supplied, and others have been fundamental workhorses for solving a class of problems that they know about. But as they say, okay, how do we transition to an analytics-driven business? How do we ask the questions that we don't know how to ask? They're looking at new sets of tools, tools such as Hadoop and streaming and other big data capabilities. So what I find is that people are looking at a new class of problems or a new way of approaching problems as opposed to just redoing what they're already doing very successfully with warehousing.
Thanks, Anand. We might move to question number 3, and this has got some sub-questions here, and this might be an area where we'll see some discussion and debate. You could argue that at the core of many big data initiatives is Hadoop. There's a lot of activity in and around the core Hadoop distribution, including obviously from Apache and Cloudera and recent announcements from Greenplum EMC. So the first question is there a battle here over what might be called the primary distribution? Todd, would you like to take that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, someone in the group chat just actually spotted it, but I'd say there is a battle going on, absolutely, and I think it's very healthy at the minute for the community. We're obviously seeing a lot of vendors this year. You could say in the last 12 months, there's a lot of commercial vendors coming to market with either a straight-up Hadoop implementation or, repackaging or some slight variant or taking part of the Hadoop ecosystem and packaging it up with something else. So we're seeing a huge amount of innovation, and from our standpoint at Yahoo, that's a good thing. We open source Hadoop because we wanted it to become a de facto platform and to have, a bunch of other folks start using it. And so to see the innovation that's going on in the marketplace is very, very appealing. On the flip side of that, of course, we don't want to see a splintering of the market. We absolutely believe that, Apache is still a very relevant source for, getting access to Hadoop and the next generation Hadoop, and that's where we will be planning our investment into. But, we want to make sure that going forward, it shouldn't matter if you're getting your distribution from Cloudera or Greenplum or insert some new stealth mode startup we've never heard of. We want customers of Hadoop to be able to take that platform and use it to, generate value and business insight. And we're hopeful that we won't see a quote-unquote fork or splintering of the market and turn into the Unix wars as we saw several years ago with Unix.
Yeah, and I'd say, Dave, so this is Luke, I'd agree with Todd's point of view. I think the other way to look at this is that there's such a tremendous amount of enthusiasm around Hadoop and big data processing, and actually somebody said recently, I thought this was great, it used to be knowledge is power, now it's storage is power. And the way that people can now store an enormous amount of data and also have access to that data for analytics at the boundary fills a very big hole that used to exist in this big data processing pipeline. So I think what we're seeing now is the big companies, the 40 billion market cap companies like EMC and IBM are getting into this game because it really does, in most everyone's thinking, reflect the next generation of big investments in data centers and also in people. And so as a consequence, this is a big game. And so I'd say that Hadoop has raced toward what would formerly be a maturity milestone that might take 4 or 5 years, and yet here we are no more than a couple of years after it just broached the sort of buzz curve, really accelerating to put the enterprise gears in motion. So we will invest in the Apache Hadoop community at Greenplum EMC with the intent that this is a broader, bigger community of participants. We may all have differences of opinion with regard to how to do the various innovations that we need to do, and that's why we engage each other and we work together as a whole to raise the whole community, because that ultimately is a very big game, very big community, and there are going to be more than one player going at it.
And we don't think that
what a kumbaya between the big players. So, Luke, you and I and Todd are on absolutely the same page, that we are at the stage in this evolution where we must vigorously compete in the market for customer dollars, but at the same time, it must not come at the expense of fragmentation, and rising tide lifts all boats is exactly the right philosophy here.
Mm-hmm. We don't think, and the last two questions are really one and the same. Does the market require a single distribution, and can the market afford a fork of Apache Hadoop? Anant, would you like to add some
No, I mean, as I said, no, I don't think so. I think that we have all lived through the Unix wars, at least some of us who are older than others. We have lived through the Unix wars, and we don't want this. And the competition must happen based on other ETs, not on the core code. And all of us who take from that open source community must give it back to that same open source community. And I think that's a philosophy that all of us can and must agree on.
Yeah, I totally agree. I also think, as we look out there at analogies, certainly the Unix wars is one, but the fact that we've gone through that and we can learn from it and say, take a look at Linux, right? Ultimately, yeah, there's one Linux kernel project, but there are many distributions that leverage the Linux kernel, and if you look at, say, Red Hat, the amount of code inside of that that's actually the kernel is really small. The rest of it, the stuff that surrounds it, is what makes it actually effective. And there are different flavors and personalities involved, but clearly Linux as a movement has succeeded because it's been embraced by a big community who have shared interests.
Thanks, gentlemen. All right, we'll move on to question number 4, and this is an interesting question. You could argue that there is a parallel universe emerging where 10 and 20 years we had fundamental SQL databases at the bottom of the stack, and then over time an enormous ecosystem of tools and applications that got built around that. And the interesting question is, do we think we'll see a parallel universe of tools and apps to the same degree that we saw with SQL databases, with things like Hadoop at the bottom of the stack? Anderson, can I pose that one to you?
Yeah, I think so too. I believe there are 3 different spaces that going after providing tools and even vertical applications that are already integrated with the analytic capabilities. So we already see a lot of tools like Datamirror, Cloudera on the Hadoop space, and we also see tools like building on the Teradata, the Oracle, the old like big data on the legacy structured database, and as well as the open source on just the in-memory or parallel memory. So I believe that in the next 2-3 years space, there will be tremendous amount of tools that coming into this space that offering, just like what the BI world is, on the predictive analytics side that integrate directly to the data where data is stored, whether it's in the cluster, cloud, or Hadoop, would be more to, I believe that.
Yeah, this is Todd. Let me just jump in as well. I think absolutely they will be, and there already is an explosion of tools and vertical applications that are being built on top of Hadoop, and you can see Hadoop, quote unquote, at the bottom of the stack there, and there will be a huge amount of innovation. I also think that what you're going to see is a huge amount of innovation in trying to bridge the traditional RDBMS SQL worlds and the Hadoop or big data unstructured worlds. And so actually, if you're a CIO sitting there, ultimately all you really care about is the business insight and the value you can derive from your data. And so you'll have this, kind of suite of data engines or, data platforms that are fulfilling different use cases for you and answering different questions. But your ultimate goal is to make that completely seamless view for your company or your enterprise.
And I think the other thing to think about is that the big corporations have made very substantial investments in BI tooling, so business objects, MicroStrategy, those kinds of traditional tools. And a lot of folks are going to be thinking about how to retask the same tooling in a new world. And I think there's a lot of that that's going to happen. So there will be a lot of confusion in the market. I think you'll see all the major players come out with Hadoop adapters and how they can leverage those tools. But I think there is a real opportunity for tools that are very aware. Alpine Miner is actually an example of a set of tools, for instance, that recognize that operating on the data where it sits is important. There are other tools that we've seen come and go, come and do very well, like ClickTech, ClickView, which has gone through a rocket ship growth. And I think the reason that tools like that succeed is because they recognize that time to value is critical. So getting the data earlier in the processing pipeline and then making it useful is becoming the new battleground for tools. And I think the old way of doing things in data warehouse was to work on the data, make it right before anybody can work with it. And what's new is that part of the process is being skipped by more and more successful applications. And so tools that can recognize that pattern and get to time to value more quickly, I think, are going to start to dominate.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anant, this is an interesting comment that Luke brought up just regarding BI. There are obviously are BI tools sitting on top of traditional SQL databases. Would you be able to make any comments about what IBM is thinking about, where Cognos intersects Hadoop?
Absolutely. I think Luke hit the nail on the head. Look, big vendors can agree. So, hi, Luke. So I think it's absolutely true that there is a class of users where they want an on-ramp to these new capabilities using the current sets of skill sets that they have, whether it is SQL and therefore SQL-like structures on Hadoop, or whether it is traditional BI, therefore BI-like capabilities on top of Hadoop, et cetera, et cetera. There's definitely a set of clients who would want to go that way because that's the best way to leverage it. But like Luke, I believe that if we take the easy route of only on-ramping our clients through these capabilities that they are comfortable with, we will kind of straitjacket their thinking, and really these sets of tools are about breaking out of the traditional logjam of knowing what questions to ask, knowing the dimensionality of the data that you're dealing with, only dealing with structured data, et cetera, et cetera. So if you say that you want to break your clients out of that logjam, then you have to open them up to a new set of tools and a new set of interactions.
Thanks, Anant. Alistair, it might be interesting to take some questions from the audience. I'm not sure the group chat questions are visible to me, so if you wanted to pick some from what you're seeing.
Sure. So going through the list, we had a lot of dialogue in the back channel, and I really appreciate you guys keeping an eye on that and great dialogue so far. We have time for a couple of questions from the group here. I'll take one from Fraser, who said, you mentioned data scientists following Ben Fry's fairly broad definition of data science covering analysis, inference, and visualization. How do you see the market for training staff for handling big data developing? As the business shifts to something that's very data-driven, what's going to happen to the personnel in IT and the retraining? And can people make that jump? And if so, how's their job going to change?
Yeah, I'll take that as Luke. I've actually had a bunch of people, we've hired up our own data scientist team and we've worked with customers, and I've had a few different observations around that. One is that I see system admins and DBAs who have been collecting big pools of data becoming kind of almost like rock stars inside businesses because they can provide data that really drives new business areas. And so those people who have been sort of collecting the ability to collect more data and create these Hadoop systems are almost accidentally falling into a new career role as like the data purveyor, the guys who sell the data to the people who make big things happen. So that's kind of organically happening. The other thing I see a lot of is people from other fields are training into data science, and a lot of the scientific disciplines, if you're a SAS analytics developer, you can come into the world of big data with the same skills and redeploy them in a different context. And generally, it's about dealing with tools. It's about thinking out of the box and using different algorithms to be predictive about data. Still, even with all of that, I think there's a limit to how many actual data scientists could be retrained in face of the overwhelming demand for them. So again, I think that's it's something that will continue, I think, over the next 4 or 5 years, and is definitely good career fodder.
So, Luke, if I can just add to it, so I believe that there are only two solutions to this. Either take the set of data scientists, as you pointed out, and make them more comfortable with much larger amounts of data than they have typically dealt with, because they have typically dealt with extraction, sample, and then modeling, as opposed to working on all the data. But the second thing I think is, and the point that Michael made in the previous talk, is that if we kind of approach it from kind of a solutions perspective, then it is entirely possible that a lot of the analytics can get embedded inside that solutions perspective where you're really looking at a business outcome, you're looking at solving a customer retention problem, you're looking at solving placement problems, supply chain problems, and others. And if that is the model in which we can take the industry, then it's possible that we could do more with less.
In other words, there's a bumper crop of additional career positions around steering business from a business value standpoint, and that's going to open up even new opportunities to retrain into big data.
All right, we have time for probably one more question, then we're going to take a brief break and push some polls and collect some people's opinions on it. Mark has a question about regulation. One of the key things that drives an industry is obviously when someone says you have to do it. What about the regulatory and data disclosure drivers, mandates like XBRL, Dodd-Frank, and the OFR National Data Repository for Securities and Counterparty Data? What happens, do you think, when people start to worry about the data that's out there and how much money is pumped into the requirement to disclose and be transparent and do what is considered by the courts a reasonable level of, or a prudent level of analysis? How does that, do you think, affect the adoption or fuel the adoption of big data in enterprises?
We've certainly seen, I don't know about you, Anand, but we have our share of business which is driven by regulatory demands. The stock exchanges, the banks, the healthcare institutions who are required to retain data and provide it on demand to regulators has been good business for us. I think as we roll forward, I think Hadoop systems are going to play an increasing role there because they provide a very high efficiency, low-cost way to store lots of data that could be analyzed effectively. And so I think it'll just shift some of what were data warehousing systems to Hadoop-oriented systems and such. The broader landscape, I think more regulations will happen as privacy concerns continue to wash over us. And certainly some of the security infrastructure we're building into our tools is designed to cater to those circumstances.
So the only thing I'll add to that, Luke, is that if we really believe that the volume of data are exploding, there's no business that can afford to keep all the data, whether it is for analytical purposes or whether it's for regulatory purposes, because they've got to keep certain critical data for regulatory purposes and analytical purposes, but they've got to make certain decisions on the rest of the data, as Michael pointed out, the value versus the cost of storing it. And therefore, we'll begin to see certain techniques that will allow people to fast filter in the stream, such as what we are doing within IBM, to allow for the ability to discard certain data that may have lower regulatory content or potentially lower analytical content.
So, Anan, I'm going to, with respect, take a slightly contrarian view to that. This is Todd. Our perspective at Yahoo is that you should be not throwing any data on the floor. And so we try to, not try, but we do keep all of the data possible that we have, and that's actually one of the, reasons that we ended up building Hadoop was to support this. I think for, enterprises and companies going forward, a lot of the value that they get out of, the quote-unquote big data is stuff that is undiscovered value. They didn't know the value were there. They didn't know the relationships were there, and they were actually doing more kind of like exploration through this data. So, our perspective, and certainly mine, is that, you can't predict whether you're going to want that data or not. So actually finding a platform that kind of matches up to the dollar cost expectation you have for storing data that maybe you don't know what value it has is going to be a big driver and has been a big driver for this explosion in the big data industry.
Yeah, there's a really kind of perverse situation as we talk about this where, many regulations say that if you make a decision based on the data that you have, then everything that contributed to that decision you need to save. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, if I have, back to Twitter sentiment data, if I use that as part of a decision-making process to change my portfolio position in a bank, that becomes part of what I have to keep. And so the second part of this is, well, how many people in a given colo, let's say I have 100 different companies sharing space, are going to be doing 6 terabytes a day of Twitter sentiment data analysis? If you have hundreds of people doing the same thing with the same data, it kind of argues for a data aggregator to step in and give you that data product where they save the data once instead of having 100 people save it for you. So I wonder if we won't see a bunch of data aggregator business created around that, much like what happened with Equifax and Axiom and others.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, I hate to cut this off because this is a great dialogue, and I think we're just getting to the start of some very interesting issues around regulation and compliance and the disclosure of analysis and so on, which we could dig into for hours more, but that's why this makes it such an interesting and hot sector for investors. So, Dave, if you want to wrap things up, and then we'll get to a bio break, that'd be great.
Yes, I would like to wrap up by just extending a thank you to the panel. We have some really interesting and, without embarrassing them, quite esteemed panelists, and it was quite good of them to spend this hour with us. So thank you to all 4 of you.